Pastoral care is still something we do, whether you know the phrase or use it a lot or use it with your volunteers or your staff. But what in the world is pastoral care in today's world? When I first started pastoring way back in '66, it was showing up at homes, going even unannounced to visit people. You visited every member every quarter, baby. What is pastoral care today? What does it look like in today's busy world of tech? I'm Newt Larson. You're with Pastorpedia. Jim Brown from Goshen and Jeff Bogue from Akron. Let's talk about, for those of us under 40, what does pastoral care, what did it used to look like? Do you remember?
Back the old days?
Yeah, the old days.
I remember being told about them, but I remember even when we started our campus 20 years ago, if you were a guest, I would get your information, I'd call you that afternoon.
That very Sunday.
That very Sunday. If I called you now, you would think it was creepy or an emergency, right? So it's the culture's changed and how we communicate and interact with each other is very, very differently. But I remember doing all that, and it was the right thing to do back then. We said we'd mug people. We'd put together a gift mug, ring the doorbell, and say, thanks for being here, and they loved it. And now they would say, are you a cult? Why did you follow me home? Kind of a thing. So it has definitely shifted.
What about pastoral care, Jim, for people in their homes, or see how you doing, or do you remember that at all?
Yeah, I remember those days.
What did it look like? Some of them actually probably don't know that we went to homes and to talk.
You showed up in a physical way as opposed to a message through text now, or you still showed up. I think that the word care, pastoral care, is the word shepherd. And I think of the word shepherd. I was in Iraq in September, and I saw this shepherd out with the sheep, and it reminded me of a couple things. You guide, you instruct, you feed, and you encourage. And so you can still do that. Now it's different. I'll send a text. It's unbelievable how many people I interact with through Facebook Messenger. In some ways, you're more connected than you ever were, because you can't get away from people if you try to because of your phone. And so you have to make choices to connect. So you message them, you text them, you email them, you send them a quarterly email that I'll send out through our church. But it's being in the picture somehow. And whether it's you or your staff or your church or people from your church. So it's a little different now. It doesn't necessarily have to be you. Someone represents the church that's in their life.
Okay, connecting. What are the obvious? Pastoral care includes when I'm sick and when I have a tragedy. What about that? Let's say what must be there in the area of pastoral care before we go into new ways.
I think that there's those kind of things. You have to. I think you have to know people, and when the church is smaller, it's easier to know people, and it's easier to know what's going on in their lives. So if you're in a smaller setting, it may be asking about the kids or the grandparent or those kind of things. If you're in a larger setting, a lot of pastoral care is presence. And so I'm going to be present in certain situations, kind of make myself available. But what's fascinating is the methods have changed, but the need hasn't. And so it's fascinating to me. If you're going in for surgery, for instance, back in the old days, I would be there early, pray with you before you went in. People aren't asking for that anymore. But I probably should definitely text afterwards and see what was going on. It's literally the idea of whatever makes them feel loved and cared for. As much as you're able to do that, you figure that out in people and do it. And sicknesses, tragedies, emergencies are definitely a part of that.
Somebody still drops everything if there's a tragedy.
Right. You're still family and you love each other, and you run to their side however you wind up doing that when they need you.
We had a staff member once that turned off his phone at 5:30 every day, and his phone was provided by the church. Well, you can imagine that he changed and needed to, but people don't have their tragedy. The church is still, they want your presence, somebody's presence there.
I would say, in the early days, I've been in Goshen 25 years, I would receive calls on our phone, and it would go to the answer machine in the middle of the night when someone checked into the hospital. And so that was hey, let your pastor know. The chaplain from the hospital would call you and tell you, you have a patient that goes to your church, come visit them. And so that was the expectation in the early days.
I think most hospitals today won't ask the question.
Right.
No, it's against the law, and they'll and they're not allowed to tell you that somebody's there. But it hasn't. I still sleep with my phone beside me. You know, I still once in a while get a call in the middle of the night. It's a little bit fascinating. The younger people are, if you grew up in the church, you think of your pastor as a resource in time of trouble. The younger you are, I actually have to push them to call me. They wouldn't think to call the church because something's going on in their life because of just how the culture shifted. And they would be very sensitive about interrupting me. They would apologize for interrupting me. And so I have to communicate publicly. In fact, I just did this weekend. We want you to call us. We want you to reach out to us because we want to be there for you with things.
How do groups enter in? Let's talk about groups in pastoral care and then our personal lives in pastoral care. How do groups work?
As far as the care in deacon care, something along those lines.
Indeed.
Yeah, and we have our church. And even since it's been all different sizes, we have it divided up into names, and then we have a group of deacons, that husband and wife that care for a certain group. They check in when someone's sick. They check and see their financial responsibilities or needs that are there. We have someone that oversees, one of our pastors oversees the deacons. And so they are the first often contact that this person receives in caring for their physical needs.
Yeah, and we would just call that life groups, and so we would be organizing into groups. It's your group leader that's probably your first point of contact and need, your group leader who's your first counselor. We would do premarital counseling, which is a form of pastoral care. We would do that through lay people. I think really, regardless of how big the church is, what you want to do as a pastor is release the priesthood, right? So we want to equip people to do the work of the ministry, raise them up to embrace who they are in Christ. And I can undercut a lay leader's opportunity to pastor by jumping in and coming to the rescue and everything. And so there's limits, there's times when people run out of time or they run out of maybe knowledge or confidence. But I think a pastor really needs to equip the body to care for each other, to better resource. Anytime there's a tragedy and anytime there's an event that affects the whole church, a scenario like that would be like the death of a child. I think the pastor's got to show up.
Absolutely.
I think you're there as the lead shepherd, and it makes a big statement.
Groups would do well to have a care captain who, a lady and a man, if it's a couple, it's probably the woman who's better at it, often, not always, who makes sure that everybody's cared for. If somebody is grouchy all the time or drops out of the group, that group knows right away. That's the advantage of every group, of pushing people to life groups, or as they were called in the Bible, adult Bible fellowships. Home adult Bible fellowships.
You know, something we shoot for, and you never get this perfectly, but we shoot for a 1-to-10 ratio.
Good.
And so, however, and that's regardless of the size of your church, but we shoot for a 1-to-10 ratio. And I like what Jim was saying, like, it's not, I am the leader of this ABF or I'm the leader of this life group. It's more than that. It's looking and saying, I care for these 10 people. And as their leader or he would say deacon, it may be helping them get into a different ABF because they dropped out for a while. So if you organize a group structure, but it's the structure that you're counting on, you're going to fall short. You have to get it into relationships.
And even to encourage them to, one of the things it does when you share, you have a structure in place, it enables people to say, well, I was here and no one contacted me. Well, here's how you do. You connect yourself with a group of people.
Yeah.
And when you connect with a group of people, there's accountability, and then there's someone overseeing you. And so it forces people to connect to groups so that they can be cared for, which is good. It's just healthy.
The answer to this question is yes. Is it important to show more pastoral care to certain people?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And who are they?
You know, one of the things, I would begin with your leaders, your staff, and I would begin with my wife and my family. And I think sometimes that gets put on the bottom, because if you become an effective pastor with everyone else and you fail as a husband or a father, then you failed miserably as a pastor.
Have you ever given her a mug?
I will say this: if we get something new, that it's a piece of clothing, or I take one to her first, just to show her that she's more valuable than the person receiving it in the church.
Good. Who else?
I think the church has a special responsibility to widows and orphans. I think orphans are fatherless children. And so a single mom, widows are, to this day, if a widow in our church calls the office, I will drop everything and give her whatever she needs. I think that's a biblical mandate. I think people who are sick, people who have learning disabilities, those kind of folks, they need to be loved on differently. And the little girl, Michelle, who's in the wheelchair, who has a plethora of issues and interrupts our service every single week, the church needs to know to love her and needs to see me do that. And
underprivileged, overlooked.
Those kind of things. Yeah. And it's part of being the body of Christ. And it's part of what causes Christ-likeness in us, that we actually need to take care of people in a different way.
There's also, there's acrostics we've all learned, and you try to balance those up. There's VDP, there's VTP, and there's VIP people. Very draining people, very teachable people, and very important people. And however you classify those, make sure you care for those accordingly.
Yeah, older people too, they're not all healthy, and they're used to good pastoral care, and sometimes churches of 100 and 200, the pastor can't do everything. And I just beg, when I coach pastors, please name somebody, director of senior care or director of seniors. They need to have somebody they know they can go to if it's not the pastor. They're used to that, and they deserve that, and they also supply your salary or have the first few years. Well, pastoral care is a huge issue, and we just want to urge you to think about these. When you see the printed sheets, you'll get a lot of individual suggestions. We are strugglers like everybody who watches this and reads our notes, but we want to bring up ideas. Pastoral care does mean shepherding the flock and loving them like everything, and also caring for special needs. You're with Pastorpedia. I'm Newt Larson, Jim Brown, Jeff Bogan. Thank you very much.